VikesNow, I am Dustin Baker. We have the post-trade deadline edition for the 4-4 Vikings. We spoke it into existence that if they just stopped the damn turnovers, they might be a good team. It turned out that was true. But then the price you paid was your QB1, who is having an upper echelon season, heads to presumably IR shortly for the rest of the year. It's a gruesome news, especially after beating the Packers in the post-Rodgers era on their turf. But we're going to talk about all of that, plus the trades that occurred yesterday. I've got Josh Frey with me. He's the boss man at Purple PTSD. How are you processing the last, 3 or 4 days?
I'll be honest, Sunday and Monday were pretty rough, but I'm getting re-excited again for this weekend. Got a couple new faces, or one new face at least on the roster now. And yeah, it's gonna be a different team moving forward, but hopefully with the defense playing as well as they are, get a little bit extra out of the running game, which they finally scored a touchdown on Sunday. So that's something we can take away that was a positive, I guess. But yeah, I still have some hope, and hopefully we get it done this weekend.
Yeah, we have extreme precedent for this. In 2017, this was the exact feeling, although Bradford probably wasn't as good as Kirk. It was wow, we lost Dalvin, we lost Bradford, the list will be fun. And then before you knew it, within a month, they had a 4-game win streak, and it turned out that they were a Super Bowl contender. Now, it's a long shot. That happens twice in 6 years. We will have to see. For that to happen, to become a contender in NFC Championship or Super Bowl, Jaren Hall basically will have to be Brock Purdy and then some, like to be one of those unearthed gems that, draft scouts couldn't quite peg, or Josh Dobbs turns into a complete reclamation project. Both are long shots, but that's why that's the hopium you have to keep this season afloat. So I want to talk to you about the trades the Vikings conducted yesterday, but in order to, I think, digest and diagnose the Dobbs trade, I have to ask you about your general sentiment on Jaren Hall. Unless the actual rocket scientist, Josh Dobbs learns the playbook in the next few days, it sounds like Jaren Hall is trending to start against Taylor Heineke's Atlanta Falcons. Before the draft lead up, now as a Viking, give me your best Jaren Hall takes.
I think overall, Jaren Hall, he was a very good quarterback at BYU. They ran a pretty pro style offense, something that you'd see a lot at the NFL level. So I think that's promising looking into this weekend. And look, he's had a couple months now to learn this playbook, learn how KOC likes to do things. And he and Wes Phillips said yesterday during their press conference, look, it's not going to be easy, but we're going to do our best to make sure that we design an offensive game plan that tailors to his skill set. And I think that skill set is using his legs a little bit, get him outside of the pocket. And that's not really something we've been able to see out of Kirk Cousins. He's definitely an on-schedule QB, and he scrambles a little bit now and then, but it's not something that you'd rather see him throwing the ball than running the ball for sure. And I think that Jaren Hall, with him at quarterback now, they've got all these weapons. He's got his ability with his legs. I think he's got a pretty solid arm. He wasn't a turnover machine at BYU by any means. He only had, I think, 11 interceptions over his 2 years as a starter there, compared to almost 60 touchdowns. Mm-hmm. So I think that's a promising outlook moving forward. I pegged him basically as a 5th-round pick going into the draft, and that's exactly where the Vikings drafted him. I think he was among the better of that crew in the middle with Clayton Tune, all those other guys that were going in that.
Tune.
My guy Clayton Tune, who's hopefully starting this weekend too, so we'll get to see him as well. But yeah, I think Hall has a great opportunity here, and if he plays well against this Falcons defense, it's been a bit of an underrated group. They've been pretty solid, especially against the running game. So that's a little bit concerning, but Jaren Hall has an opportunity in front of him. And if he goes and takes advantage of it, he's got a great chance to start for the rest of the year.
No Vikings quarterback has rushed for 50 yards or more since the 2012 playoff game when Joe Webb unexpectedly started. So yeah, you are going to see, whether you like it or not, from Josh Dobbs or Jaren Hall in the next month, you're going to see some mobility from a quarterback that we're not used to. It's not that Kirk was completely statuesque. It's just he ran the ball a little bit in Washington, but when he got to Minnesota, he was basically like, I'm done with that. I'll always maintain for the rest of my life, if Kirk Cousins would have took off and ran 4 to 5 times per game, he would have won over the fan base immediately, but he just never quite did that. So the scouting report is there. He has the possibility to mature, but do you think he will be good on Sunday? Is it more likely that he looks like Kellen Mond Or is it more likely that he nibbles at a Brock Purdy status?
I think we're looking somewhere right in the middle there. I don't think he's Kellen Mond by any means. I think he has much more skills as a passer than Kellen Mond did coming into the league. And we saw that throughout his 2 preseasons in Minnesota. But honestly, I feel like the Vikings, they're going to have to dummy down some of these things with their passing game, especially. They're not going to be able to run all the intricacies that they were able to do with Kirk Cousins, who's been in KOC's offense for the past 2 years now, and he's run it very effectively. And KOC pretty much has maximized everything out of Kirk. We're gonna have to see Jaren Hall. It's gonna be a little bit more of a simplified offense, and hopefully he's able to take advantage of that. I don't think that we're gonna see like a 280 passing yards, like 3 touchdown game out of him by any means, unless Jordan Addison goes out and breaks off like a 60-yard touchdown like he did a couple weeks ago against the Niners. But I think that he's able to make he's able to make the on schedule throws. He's able to improvise when the pocket breaks down a little bit. So I think we're somewhere right in the middle. I think he probably comes in and he's not going to be a top 15 starting quarterback by any means. I mean, if he is, that'd be just incredible. That basically means that the Vikings might have their QB of the future if that happens. But I wouldn't expect any he's not going to throw any dumb turnovers. He's not going to have the dumb interceptions. He had the fumble last weekend, but I think that's more of him just coming in cold and just not really knowing what to do and just panicking a little bit, which you'll expect out of a rookie QB. But I think we're going to get a decent game out of him.
Okay, I keep thinking now that Dobbs is on the roster, Mullins is a pretty decent QB too. I keep thinking and writing that all Hall has to be is decent in order to keep the other guys at bay. And what I mean by decent to me is about 19 for 30, a touchdown, hopefully a rushing touchdown as well, maybe a pick or a fumble, because that's bound to happen. I mean, this is what you get when you're reduced to a QB2 or in his case a QB3. And I really hope that fumble against the Packers that you mentioned was just welcome to the NFL, and he doesn't have that going for him, because that could have been brutal. The game hung in the balance, and of course, fumble is ultimate eye roll. All right, Josh Dobbs was acquired. It was the way that the business took place. It was basically almost like an NBA 3-way trade where Cleveland did the Jaguars and Dobbs to the Vikings, and then the Cardinals got some stuff too. But it's weird. When last night I spent some time watching his all 22 and then some of his YouTube stuff, and I swear if I walked over my phone to my neighbor and said, "Watch this," and you just showed the highlights, they'd be like, "Oh, that looks like Lamar Jackson. That guy's awesome." But he's been on 7 teams in 7 seasons, so there must be warts to this guy somewhere. When you watch his games against the Cardinals, he looks really good. He doesn't seem to uncork it or throw deep in that offense. I don't understand why. But do you like Josh Dobbs? And if you do or don't, what are his weaknesses?
I like Josh Dobbs as an insurance plan for sure. I think if Jaren Hall just lays an absolute dud on Sunday, I won't feel terrible about having him as a starting quarterback moving forward, especially considering you've also hopefully got Nick Mullins coming back somewhat soon. And he's another one of those guys who's a very mobile quarterback. He has sneaky athleticism, man. He is one of the best running QBs in the league. He's at over 250 yards already for the season, I think, and 3 rushing touchdowns for the Cardinals. So he's got some wheels on him, and he's one of the most efficient runners when he does it too. The problem with him is just turnovers. He had 5 interceptions, and he's a guy that definitely is warranted to fumble the ball a couple times. I think he had 8 of those during his time in Arizona this season. And it might just be part of it is Arizona's offensive line is just terrible, and he was just facing too much pressure all the time. And hopefully in Minnesota, that just isn't going to be a concern anymore. And he's going to have much better weapons with Jordan Addison, Justin Jefferson coming back, TJ Hawkinson. So he's going to have more reliable pass catchers than he did in Arizona. And James Conner also was a guy that went down on IR. So that only limited even further Arizona's ability to move the ball. But yeah, I think he's a decent quarterback. If he can limit the turnovers, though, that's the problem, and that's what's derailed the Vikings all season, and that would be my worry if he was to step in as the starter moving forward.
We even though the Vikings still have 1 turnover per game since they got their poop in a group, One turnover per game is actually pretty acceptable,
Yeah.
especially if you're forcing some takeaways. So they fixed it. They basically have become a decent or average team at turning the ball over in the last 4 games, which is why they started winning. Funny how that works. Yeah, we don't want to go back to, all right, well, this imbecile is just fumbling and throwing interceptions. Well, I think this question will force you to put your money where your mouth is. Let's say, God forbid, against Taylor Heineke's Falcons, that Jaren Hall does look like Kellen Mond, and we're like, oh gosh, yep, he's not ready. Go figure. He's a 5th-rounder. Week 10, Nick Mullins comes off IR. Let's assume his back's great. Would you want to see Josh Dobbs or Nick Mullins start against the Saints, assuming the Falcons game just went terribly?
If Nick Mullins is off of IR by then, I'd want him.
Okay.
I'd want him over Josh Dobbs, honestly. I I think Nick Mullins has much more ability as a passer than Josh Dobbs does. He's kind of that C version of what Brett Favre was in his prime, where he's just a gunslinger. He'll whip it downfield. He's not worried about it. He'll do it whenever he needs to. And if you've got guys like Jordan Addison, Justin Jefferson on the roster, more often than not, those are probably going to result in good things than bad things. So I think I'd rather see Nick Mullins there. But with the trade for Dobbs, it just doesn't feel like that's going to happen, unfortunately. So yeah, I'd rather see Mullins. I doubtful that would actually happen, but I do feel better about Mullins than Dobbs for sure.
Okay. So what I keep getting back to with Jaren Hall before we move on to Ezra Cleveland, and this is kind of Captain Obvious, is I really wish Justin Jefferson was playing this week for Jaren Hall to have the full exploit. There was a time when we looked up at the schedule after Jefferson was hurt, and we were like, how is this offense going to do anything without Jefferson? And then they were able to, because Kirk suddenly just became great, and the offensive line decided it was great. And then that anxiety went away. I think midway through the Packer game, we're like, hey, this offense works just fine, baby. Jefferson, when he comes back, he's going to be gravy somehow. And now it's back to, gosh, I don't know if a rookie quarterback without Jefferson can make the thing hum. But we're going to find out in a few short days. Ezra Cleveland, drafted by the Vikings in the 2nd round of 2020, pretty decent for his first 3 years, became damn good this year, especially the pass protection. But they also signed Dalton Reisner, 6 weeks ago? And in the last 2 games in which Reisner has started, this version of the offensive line is the best that we've seen per pass protection in a decade. Evidently, they believed that because Ezra Cleveland was going to hit free agency in 4 short months, that they could get something for him. And bada bing, they got a 6th-rounder, a high 6th-rounder, because it belonged to the Panthers vis-a-vis the Jaguars. So I know some of our colleagues didn't like it. Are you cool with the Cleveland trade because they have Reisner and because they have Blake Brandel and Chris Reed somewhere?
I'm okay with moving off of him for sure. I think with him being a free agent next offseason and the fact that you have Reisner there and Blake Brandel waiting in the wings in case something happens, I think that you've got plenty of depth at the guard spot. It's honestly a matter of I'll feel great about it depending on what Ezra Cleveland's next contract is. Because if that's the case where the Vikings just weren't if the Vikings and him weren't close enough in terms of an extension, and that's why it didn't get signed, and that's why he gets moved. If they feel like the price tag was just way too much to pay for him, and they can retain Dalton Reisner for cheaper next offseason, then I think that I'm fine with it. If I'd rather spend that money on Justin Jefferson, Christian Darrisaw, all these guys, keep them around than a left guard who had a career year, and just maintain all the weapons and hope that Dalton Reisner remains a top tier pass protector at the left guard spot. If he doesn't get that kind of contract, then I'd probably feel a little bit worse about it. But right now, I understand why they did it.
I would say it's virtually guaranteed that Kwesi Adofo-Mensah knew what Ezra Cleveland's current asking price was. Those conversations would have happened throughout the summer. We just didn't really care because it was a guard, and Cleveland was meh. I mean, he was good, but he wasn't great. And so I'm going to guess that they were somewhat worlds apart. And then you got Reisner for cheap, who seems to love being in Minnesota. And Reisner's not old one iota. I think the writing was on the wall that we might as well get something. It's just that because he was a top 10 guard per PFF, we and the fan base just assumed, sweet, we're getting a 4th, baby. And that's not the asking price for what will probably be a rental. in Jacksonville. Looks like Jawan Williams is coming back to the Vikings. He's on the practice squad. I don't know if you saw that in your alerts. That just showed up. A little bit of quasi breaking news. So Cleveland out the door, Dobbs in the door, Jaren Hall to start Sunday. You and I have been on an odyssey predicting the win-loss outcome for this team. I started with 11-6. I looked like an idiot when they were 1-4. Then I started to look smart again because Cousins and the offensive line and defense got good. Then Cousins got hurt. Meanwhile, I think you started at 10-7. Then they looked buffoonish. You dipped down to around 6-11. Then you came back and said, yeah, I don't know. These games look like they could be frisky. Now they don't have their quarterback. I think because the easy part of the schedule is coming up and they have 3 options at quarterback, one of them is bound to be decent in a really good setup for any quarterback. I think they're on their way to going something like 5-4 in these next games to the dreaded 9-8 or 8-9. Is that about where you're at? Or do you think there's a little 2017 magic to be had?
I think I'd land right around that 9-8 range too. I know Denver's looked great over the past couple weeks, but I'm just still not convinced that they're going to be all that awesome. So the schedule still, I feel like it's easy enough to win some of these games, and I think the Vikings played their hand when they didn't trade Daniil Hunter, didn't trade KJ Osborne, didn't trade Jordan Hicks. They still feel like they can win games this season. And I think that they feel like they can be competitive enough to go get into the playoffs. And then after that, who knows what happens? Right now, they'd be scheduled to go play a game at Detroit and division rivalry. I mean, if they win one of those games, at least down the stretch of the season, they're going to be familiar with that team. And hopefully they can go pull off an upset or something like that. So yeah, I'd probably land 9-8. Probably borderline on the playoffs, depending on how the rest of the NFC shakes up, because it's just an absolute mess right now. But yeah, I still think that this team is capable of winning games. The defense has been awesome. The Vikings didn't trade away their guys. They're going for it. And I think they're going to be competitive for the rest of the year.
When they sunk to 1-4 and Justin Jefferson was hurt, and it looked like they weren't going to get better. All of that stuff that we said about, well, if they stop the turnovers, they'll be good. It didn't look like they were going to stop the turnovers. So it was fair during that week to talk about, well, maybe Daniil Hunter will be traded. Maybe they're going to be 1-6 or 2 and blah, blah, blah by the deadline. But the moment they beat the 49ers, they were never going to have this big fire sale because they tell you their plans. Kwesi Adofo-Mensah doesn't lie. They're in the midst of a competitive rebuild. They're trying to thread the needle. They're 4-4. Their locker room doesn't believe that they sucked. They're not going to roll over and die. And so the very spirit of a competitive rebuild is to not have fire sales. That's like, as soon as I realized, all right, they beat the 49ers, they're going to convince themselves they're good. It was the easiest prediction in the world that Daniil Hunter wasn't going to be traded. And now I bet you he stays. He said in August he wanted to be a Viking for life. When you have a competitive rebuild or any type of system, you can't really just dance into the offseason with 0 edge rushers on the roster. So I firmly believe that Hunter will remain with the Vikings for 3 or 4 more years. And that's where we're at. All right, final thing. We know Taylor Heineke's starting. We know Jaren Hall is starting with perhaps a little bit of a Hail Mary if they switch to Dobbs the last second, but I don't see it. What's your prediction? Do the Vikings win this week or no?
I think that this defense has played very well over the past few weeks, and I think that continues this week. Taylor Heineke's a decent quarterback, but I mean, he's not like an all-world type of player or anything. So I do think the Vikings are going to get it done. They're going to ride with their defense. They're going to hope that Jaren Hall makes a few plays, and they're going to pull out a 20-17 victory on the road this weekend.
Ooh, I like it. And reminder, the Vikings saw Taylor Heineke 1 year ago, and the only thing that separated them from utter domination in that game was a referee who decided to play safety and just bungle the play and keep the game unnecessarily close. All right, man. I think that's where I'm going to settle. I've had a hard time processing realism versus hopium on, because 2017, if I would have had this show week 5 or whatever, I would have been like, they're just not that good and they don't have it in them. And I was really wrong because they rattle off all those wins and got, was it 13-3 that year? So I do believe that there's a little bit of hope for this team to get like that, but it really is dependent on Hall being one of those late round finds. I don't need him to be Even as good as Purdy. I need him to be able to make some throws, and any quarterback that comes into this current offensive line should be set up to thrive. It's going to be funny when he takes off, or when he scrambles, or when Josh Dobbs scrambles. The offensive linemen are going to be like, "What the hell? You're allowed to do
Yeah.
that?" Because they haven't seen that pretty much ever. All right, man. You got Vikings by 3. I think I'm trending that way. When we talk 1 week from now, we'll either be singing Hall's praises and talking about how he's heading home for his first start at US Bank Stadium, or we'll be contemplating Josh Dobbs or Nick Mullins.
That sounds great, man. Yeah, hopefully we get it done. We just need a game manager at QB, ride the defense, make a few plays on offense, and hopefully they get it done this weekend.
Yeah, and the schedule is this is truly the easy part. Nothing is easy in the NFL, but it is the Falcons, the Saints, the Broncos, the Bears, and the Raiders. And that is really tailor-made for a quarterback who's trying to find his footing.
Hey, I mean, this Falcons team's 4-4. Saints next week are 4-4. You win those 2 games, and you're riding pretty well going into this final stretch here in terms of your playoff. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, these next 2 games are really important, and hopefully they get these wins.
All right, man. We'll talk to you in 1 week.
Sounds great, man. See you then.
Later.